now that everyone's quiet, I'll just go right into it. Thank you guys for coming out. This is the presentation, Have Your Art and Eat It Too. My name is Dave Scandurra. I do edible landscapes at Cape Cod. We're based in West Barnstable, but we pretty much go all over the Cape and even off Cape. For as long as we're chasing work, we'll go wherever, but eventually we want to keep it more local. It's nice when we have jobs that are like right down the road. That's really cool. But this is kind of a niche thing, so let's get right in here. So that's our logo. That's what we do. So we do consultation, design, installation, year-round landscape maintenance, a lot of vegetable gardens. We also have a plant nursery, which I actually do have. I have a list here of our current plant nursery inventory kind of stuff. You can pass around if you want. I promise this isn't like a sales pitch. I'm not trying to like sell stuff, but if you want to buy some of these cool plants, perennial edible plants, we got a lot of stuff. We are big on native plants. We install drip irrigation. We're big on permaculture, and I'll talk a lot about that. Fencing, workshops like this one. We also lead wild edible plant walks, different times of the year, with different land trusts and different conservation areas. And one-on-one gardening lessons, and four-season food production, so trying to help people grow as much food for as much of the year as possible, even in our colder climate. And we help people compost at their home. And this one is funny. I made this for a previous presentation, so I couldn't not do it. But what my friends think I do, what my mom thinks I do, what I think I do, what society thinks I do, is what I really do. Yeah. So I want to talk about foodscaping. I'm going to go through the who, what, where, when, why, and then the how. So, foodscaping, who can do foodscaping? Who is this presentation for? For me, for you, someone you might know that you think would be into this kind of thing. Aspiring food grower, kids, anybody who eats food, really. And I think that's everybody in this room. Foodscaping, what? And what I mean by what am I trying to get across with this presentation? Think outside the box, or the bed, or the fence, or the garden. Think outside the supermarket industrial complex. Take control of where your food comes from. Consider growing edible and medicinal plants wherever you have access to. And let's create a more ecological, just, and regenerative food system. Foodscaping where? Front yards, backyards, side yards, schoolyards, roadsides, rooftops, ridges, valleys, senior centers, nursing homes, hospitals, wet spots, shady spots, anywhere where you thought, oh, you can't grow food there. I think we could. Unused town land, parks, at a friend's or relative's home. And if you're a broke, landless person like me, maybe you should get into this business of growing food for other people. Because if you're jonesing to get your hands in the dirt, and if you're like me, it'll probably be another 50 years before, if I ever own land. But so it's a good option for someone who's broke and in debt. But I want to encourage you guys to think about growing food in not your average places, right? Foodscaping when? Now, yesterday, and then this quote that I think about on a daily basis is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. It kind of irks me. I talk to a lot of folks, and I'll recommend certain trees that they could plant in their landscape, and they always say, well, when am I going to get fruit from that? When am I going to get these nuts or whatever? And I say, well, it could be 5 years. I mean, some nut trees could take even 10 years. Oh, I'm never going to do that. Why would I do that? And then it's kind of like, well, for the next generation. I mean, that's one of the ultimate legacies we can leave as a human. What is the one legacy we can leave that is not doing destruction to the planet, but we're making the world a better place? So plant some trees. There's other quotes. I think there's something like, a wise person plants a tree knowing that they're not going to sit in the shade or something like that. I'm not trying to say I'm wise, but. So foodscaping, why? And I've got 2 slides on this because I think it's important. Why? The need for more local and healthy food. Too many toxic chemicals being dumped into our landscapes. Our globalized food system is fragile and exploitative. The lack of connection between food, land, and culture. Basically, we're in this fast food culture nowadays. And for the next generations, of course, I already mentioned that. Also, it's healthy to be outside digging in the dirt. There's antidepressant microbes that they found in the soil, so get your fingers dirty, get your hands in the dirt. And then 2 slides on why, because I think, why not? We got to honor our earth. To grow food is to be human. It is not a hobby. Like it's more like breathing or drinking water. It's something that it's in our blood. And once you get a taste for it, you just realize how natural it is. Spend more time outside. I think I mentioned that on the next slide, but it's worth mentioning twice. Teach the next generation. Did I mention that on this? As a positive revolutionary act, and to lessen our footprint on the planet. So, that's the who, what, where, when, and why. And what about how? And how about some with love and with tools? But that was actually cool. That found that on my wheelbarrow one day this past winter. But it kind of says it all, right? So now I'm going to talk about the how, which is basically this is the presentation here. So it's the different sections of the presentation are the first thing I'm going to talk about is permaculture in the landscape. Then I'm going to talk about organic and ecological land care. Then site analysis, incorporating edibles into the landscape, building soil, grass to garden conversion, edible forest gardens, and the best edible perennials for the landscape at the end. And then if we still have time, I have random pictures of just work that we've done and things that would hopefully inspire folks. There's a few more seats up here. In case anyone trickles in, there's a few more front row, front and center. But I can understand if you want to be as far away as possible. I did harvest my garlic today. So permaculture in the landscape. This is not a drawing that I did, but it's something I found online, which is just kind of cool. It gets your gears turning and makes you go, oh, I want to be there. I want to live there. Just this little house with all these great gardens around it, and it looks like things are planted intentionally and designed around someone's life. So what is permaculture? Has anybody here heard of permaculture? Few hands going up, that's good. So if you haven't heard much about it, you're going to hear more about it because we're not going away anytime soon. Us permaculture practitioners or permaculturists, or whatever you want to call us. So permaculture is a design process which aims to optimize the health of the ecosystem while also providing for our human needs. It's a decision-making tool centered in holistic land use, utilizing the patterns and resilient features observed in natural ecosystems. And the super dummy version of it is the realization that humans are actually integrated in the ecosystem. And if we do anything we do out in the world, in nature, it's going to have an effect somewhere else. So it's just really realizing the connection of everything and the wholeness of it all. So this guy, Bill Mollison, who sort of like coined the term permaculture, he's got a cool definition, which is, permaculture is a philosophy of working with rather than against nature, of thoughtful observation rather than thoughtless labor, and of looking at plants and animals and all their functions rather than treating any area as a single product system. So you kind of get the idea. And permaculture may overlap with other schools of thought or other design sciences or forms of agriculture like agroforestry, which is integrating trees into agriculture, so tree crops, and there's a few different ways you can do agroforestry, like alley cropping, so that's growing annuals in between tree crops, or creating windbreaks on a farm, or planting trees around a wetland area as like a riparian buffer. So agroforestry is a beautiful thing, and we should be doing more of it. It also overlaps with organic and regenerative agriculture, ecological design and engineering, natural building, water harvesting, ecological restoration, holistic management, keyline design, and edible landscaping, of course. Any questions? Feel free to ask questions as we go along.
What's keyline design?
Good question. Keyline makes a great pie. Keyline design is it's more for when you're really on a larger scale, kind of bigger property, when you're talking about acres. When I guess you can do it on a small scale too, but it's managing water and rainfall in a way that it's really tough to describe, but it's basically trying to send water to certain areas of the property or the land that might otherwise just be getting really dry. So it's saying, okay, this area, we're getting a lot of rainfall here. Can we build diversion swales to spread that water into other areas of the property that might not actually get a lot of water? So it might be difficult to grow crops in a certain area, but if you design, it also includes, creating dams or ponds, or it can mean that. So yeah, it's a whole interesting thing, and you can do it on a small scale for sure, but it's generally applied on a much larger, hundreds of acres kind of thing. So recommended permaculture reading. We're in a library, so we can talk a little bit about books. These books are all fantastic, and I highly recommend. So perennial vegetables. I'm going to talk at the end a lot about our favorite perennial plants to add into the landscape. But this book, I highly recommend. If that topic is interesting to you, you should pick up this book, because it's all the when we're going about our farming and growing our food and stuff. It's a lot of annual plants. It's a lot of plants that you plant once, and you do the thing, you harvest it, and you till it up, or whatever it is you do, and you plant again. But perennial plants are plants that live 3 or more years. So the most common example of that would be asparagus, or rhubarb, or artichokes are well known and perennial, but not quite perennial in our climate, unfortunately, unless you're growing them in a greenhouse. But these are plants that live year after year, and they just get bigger and bigger each year, and you can just harvest more. And so when I read this book, it totally changed my my perspective, and that was kind of my gateway into this whole thing. Restoration agriculture is a beautiful concept of how we can apply things like permaculture and ecological design to help steer lands towards becoming more ecologically diverse, and creating more habitat for wildlife, but also growing our food that we want to eat. So it incorporates. So it has a lot to do with native trees, shrubs, and plants, and kind of farming the native plants and choosing the right plants for your area. So we actually had this author, Mark Shepard. We're part of a group called the Food Forest Initiative, and if you're interested in this kind of thing, I highly recommend you talk to me after, or sign up and write something. I want to do the Food Forest Initiative. We have a little sign up, or the sign up sheet is actually, if you want a PDF of this presentation, sign up on the sign up sheet. If you want to join the Food Forest Initiative, make a little note that says I want to join, or come to a meeting. But Mark Shepard came, and we were looking at some pieces of land to see what his interpretation would be for how to apply restoration agriculture on Cape Cod. So it's pretty cool stuff, and we really want to be doing this. We're already talking about doing this in the under the power lines in certain areas. We have been talking with Harwich Water Department, and it's looking like we'll be able to do a mini restoration agriculture strip under the power lines, which will include a lot of. We're limited. We have to do things under 12 feet, but we can do American hazelnuts, elderberries, blueberries, and so on. A lot of cool things there. So. This other book, The One Straw Revolution, is just a fantastic, very philosophical book that really paved the way for permaculture. This was written, I think it was written in the 60s, but then it was translated to English, to American. And it's a fantastic book, super inspirational. Edible forest gardens, I'm going to be talking about food forests and this whole concept. These books will blow your mind. Guy's Garden is a great introduction to permaculture, so if you just want to kind of get get a taste of the whole picture of it, I recommend that book. And then Tree Crops was written in the 20s when the Dust Bowl thing was happening, and he was saying, we're losing all of our topsoil because we're plowing and we're tilling and we're plowing. We need to be planting trees. We shouldn't be growing corn on hillsides. We should be growing chestnuts. And this book, you could read that book, Tree Crops, and say, this book was written last year. It just feels so poignant and up to date, and it's, I highly recommend these books. That's why I have a whole slide about them. So, okay, so these are permaculture. So now we're talking about permaculture in the landscape. So how to apply this philosophy into the landscape. So this is a great model or a learning tool is to talk about the zones of use. So remember that house I showed a few slides back where it's got the house and then the gardens. So think about your house as where the people is, or that's like where you're spending most of your time, and then you start to go out from that. Your zone 0 is I guess those people would be zone nothing, and then zone 0 is your house. But then, as you get out from that, your first zone, that's your frequently visited area. So that's like the area that when you get out of your car and you walk to your main door to get into your house, these are the most frequently visited areas. So those are the kind of things that you put the high maintenance types of plants, or those are the types of gardens that you put there. The ones that you're going to really need to check on very regularly. So you might include your tomatoes, things that need some twining and staking and pruning. But then, zone 2 might be your semi-intensely, intensively cultivated food production. So, like the areas that you might see, or you might visit a couple times a day, but they don't need quite as much attention, and it kind of just goes out from there. It's when the more you kind of meditate on this zones of use concept, you will start to be like, oh yeah, I really should put my what you realize is that I should put my veggie garden, my herb garden, right outside my kitchen. That's the most important thing, because that's when it's going to get used the most. If you can look out your kitchen sink window, you're going to use that food a lot more, especially for herbs and stuff that you can just do a quick snippet and throw it in your dish. You don't want to put that kind of stuff in the back 9. You want, that's for the tree crops and the stuff that barely needs tending to. So some ways to go permaculture in the landscape would be incorporating perennial plants, trees, and shrubs as much as you can. Of course, edible ones if you can, or native. Catch, store, and use as much rainwater as you can. And also, for a lot of people I talk to, they're thinking, wait, I kind of want to get rid of this rainwater. I don't want moisture getting in my basement and things like that. So then the trick is really, okay, well yeah, that's smart. You don't want to get water into your basement, but can you direct the water to a certain area that you can create a little rain garden, or create a dry riverbed that's basically dry all the time except for when you're getting a downpour, and then you direct the water to a certain place. So another thing to think about to go permaculture in the landscape is the waste of one process feeds another. So your waste of your kitchen scraps, that's valuable stuff. Don't just throw that away. Incorporate that into your compost pile, or things that you might think of as waste. Is there a way that you can incorporate that into your permaculture endeavors or your landscape? Take advantage of all the microclimates. Every piece of earth that you look at, or property or anything, there's going to be little microclimates. So what I mean by microclimates is, an example would be, you have a south-facing building that gets a ton of sun. That's obviously a very warm microclimate, right against the house. Let's say you have a patio, south-facing building. That's going to be a super cooking microclimate, versus the opposite of that would be the backside of the building that happens to get maybe maybe it stays really moist, or maybe there's windy areas, or there's different little niches and really to take advantage of those. And like for instance, if you have your little dry area, you could probably plant rosemary there, your sunny area, and it could probably overwinter. It probably would. Rosemary can overwinter in a nice warm microclimate. But if you put it on the wet, cold, dark, shady side, it's definitely not going to overwinter. Plant in polycultures rather than monocultures. So instead of just like a one field of one thing or one row of one thing, consider planting a few different things in one place. So the most common annual polyculture that a lot of people in here probably know about is the Three Sisters, which is the corn, beans, and squash. So those are 3 plants that can coexist in one garden space. That the corn grows tall, and the beans can climb up the corn, and the squash can act as a mulch or kind of just spreads on the ground. But taking that concept and really trying to maybe even experiment with it. Let's see what kind of plants you can grow in one place, and if they're not competing with each other and they're complementing each other, you're maximizing your yields there. And to turn problems into solutions. Like I was talking before, if you have too much water, you think, oh, I got too much shade, or I got too much, my soil is too much sand, or I have, it's all clay. You can turn those problems into solutions. So we're still in the permaculture and the landscape section here. There's a couple spots in the front, there's spots around, don't be shy. So this is just an example. I didn't actually draw this, but I found this online, and I thought it does a good job at describing the different types of plants that can be working together. So you have a peach tree, and most people would think, all right, you get your peach tree, maybe we'll just grow grass around it. But so you could have a chicory plant, which is known to be a dynamic accumulator or a nutrient accumulator. It's got a taproot, so it's able to get minerals and nutrients from deeper in the soil, and then it's kind of making that available in the plant material above soil. You have cosmos as a pollinator attractor or a beneficial insect attractor. Red clover as a nitrogen fixer. Clovers and legumes, they can create nitrogen through a symbiotic relationship of bacteria in the soil with this plant. The bacteria actually take the nitrogen from the air, because there's all nitrogen in the air, and they make it plant-available nitrogen. And I'm going to talk more about bacteria and all the soil stuff in the building soil section.
Excuse me, a question
Yeah.
about nitrogen fixing. In order to take advantage of that, do you grind the clover up in the fall and the spring? How do you use it?
Yeah, that's one thing. So a lot of the woody nitrogen fixers, you do want to actually, a lot of times they're sort of sacrificial plants that you cut them back and then you just kind of mulch with them, like they call it, like chop and drop. But I'm pretty sure that they do provide nitrogen, even if they're not, if they have the little nodules, which most legumes do. If you dig up the root, like you dig up like a white clover, and you'll see these little nodules on the roots, and those are able to feed not only the clover but other plants around. But I'm pretty sure with other nitrogen fixing plants, you kind of have to do a chop and drop in order for you to get that, for them to actually provide the nitrogen that you're looking for. Yep. So then you have a comfrey plant, which a lot of people will do the chop and drop thing. They use it as a mulch because they got these big broad leaves, and it grows just so rapidly. You can cut a comfrey back to the ground multiple times in the year, 3 or 4 times throughout the season or more, and it'll just keep growing and growing. It also, of course, it's a very tasty edible flower. So if you don't do that, you can eat those flowers. You have strawberries as sort of a living ground cover, suppressing weeds, and then garlic, which would be a repeller, which is why no one wants to sit there. No, just kidding. But that's more for like voles and things that could possibly scratch at the bark of the peach tree in the winter months and stuff. Yeah, little guys that could do damage to the tree bark. Don't like garlic. Bunnies and stuff like that. So then this leads me to there's a thing people will call the 7 F's of useful plants. So it's not only that we're just looking to grow food in a landscape. We might also be looking to grow fodder, whether we have chickens. Maybe we want to, instead of just buying grain, maybe we want to grow grains to feed the chickens, or grow certain crops that we're going to feed to them, or just whatever weeds we have growing around. Use those as fodder to feed to your chickens or your goats or whatever animals maybe you have pet bunnies. Or maybe you want to grow things for fiber, for basketry or other things, or you want to grow fuel for wood for your wood burning stove, or fertilizers. So this would be plants that, like I was mentioning, nitrogen fixing plants, or things like comfrey that you can make compost with, or use as a mulch, or use to increase the overall fertility of your gardens. And then pharmaceuticals with an F, that would be your medicinal plants. And then you can't forget fun, because you got to have fun while you're at it. So just real quick to talk about sustainable versus regenerative. Sustainability is kind of right there in the middle. We're just kind of cruising along. We're just keeping things as they are. We're sustaining things. But we really want to think of the way we interact with the land in our farms and in landscapes and everywhere as being regenerative. So we're building soil. We're harvesting water. We're not losing. We're growing more than we're taking away. I mean, most of our agriculture, especially the annual agriculture, is very extractive. It's not. We're not. The goal isn't to build topsoil. The goal is just to grow the food and get it out, and we end up degrading our lands that way. So with the permaculture lens, we're really trying to create regenerative landscapes. And the key takeaway that if there's one thing that I want to say about this is that humans, we can actually have a positive impact on the planet if we if we use these tools and learn about how to be more ecological, which is very contrary to what most people would think. That humans were very destructive, and we tend to just kind of leave our footprint everywhere we go. But we can actually change this pretty good if we start humbling ourselves to these processes. So now the next little section I want to talk about is organic and ecological land care, because this is how we do things, and this is how you can totally manage your land. And I want to talk a little bit about NOFA. And y'all heard of NOFA, Northeast Organic Farming Association? It's a great organization. It's been around for a while, I think like almost 50 years. And they've just been a support network in helping people to grow organically. Back when organic was not that cool. So they also have a branch of this organization that deals with land care, not just farming, but landscaping and land care. And so we took, me and two of my business partners, we went down to Connecticut for 5 days to take this intensive course and to become accredited organic land care providers, which doesn't mean anything except for to me, because no one really is like, are you accredited organic? No one really cares. But it's actually really great. The organic standards are amazing. They're fantastic, and I think most landscapers, if there's any landscapers in the room, I encourage you guys to check out NOFA. And so I want to talk about the standards. So basically, a lot of you guys are probably already doing this. If you're gardening and if you're not dumping chemicals onto your properties, but you'd be surprised at how many landscapers would look at this like it's just total hippie hogwash. So basically the organic standards in landscaping and land care, I've boiled it down to the next two slides. So basically compost is your go-to fertilizer. Whether you're trying to boost your grass or your perennials or your vegetables or whatever it is, adding a bit of compost or compost tea is a huge thing. If you ever like spilled compost on your grass, or you just see it just gets green and it explodes. The true way to organically treat lawns is to top dress with a 1/4 inch of compost every year. And until you get to a certain point where it doesn't need it anymore because you've inoculated it with enough biology that your grass will grow fine and you don't need to be dumping all these chemicals on it.
Oh, excuse me.
Yep.
Compost, how often do you add it to your gardens?
So we strive to, the more that we see the results from compost, adding compost in our gardens, the more we try to do it as much as we can. Especially if it's a customer of ours that we know has a high standard and they have a budget for it. Almost every time we plant a new thing or every year we're adding a compost.
Just once a year then, or with new plantings, you don't add it throughout the season?
We will add throughout the season if we're doing like lettuce and we're doing multiple crops, or maybe we pull the carrots. In a perfect world, it doesn't always happen, but if they're, we especially if they're composting, if we can dig to the bottom of their pile and get some good stuff, if we can top dress, I mean, you just see the results. Even mulching a garden with compost, just if your garden's already planted right now and it looks like meh, I'm telling you, just add some compost to it, and you'll in a few days or a week you'll say, oh, everything looks better, everything looks brighter, greener. For organic farming, I mean, any of the people that are doing intensive, you want to add compost every time you plant a new thing. So then there's this thing called compost tea. Anyone ever heard of it? Oh, nice. Well, sweet. So now they're calling it liquid biological amendment, which sounds a lot less like, hippies sitting around like,
It's your compost too, that's pretty good, right?
but it's liquid biological amendment because the goal is that you're inoculating whether it's soil or you're spraying it as a foliar spray with biology. So you're creating an aerobic tea. You basically take compost and you put it in water and you get the bubbles going and you create this brew that you can spray as a foliar spray or just water your plants with it. And you might think like, oh, it's just this like, how is that doing anything? And you might not see direct results right away, but over time, if you're using compost tea, you will you're boosting the biology, and I'm going to talk more about the biology and building soil in a couple slides. Another thing that will drive landscapers crazy, conventional landscapers, is when mowing, you mulch the grass clippings and leave them on the grass. Why haul away that biomass and that beautiful material only to come back and put fertilizer back on? It's just crazy. But it makes landscapers a lot of money. So a lot of these things actually, when you realize the organic standards, it's like, oh, it's actually do less and intervene less, and it's like, oh, now you know why, there's a big push for all these other things, the high maintenance kind of land care. Do as minimal, this one's a tough one for most people, do as minimal of a leaf cleanup in the fall as you can stand. If removing leaves in the fall, make sure there is a mulch covering any bare soil. So it's, if you've mulched and you have mulched beds and stuff, it's not the worst thing to remove leaves in the fall. But if you have bare soil and you got your leaves that have dropped in the fall, that's just like scraping away nature's mulch. I mean, trees drop their leaves in the fall to insulate the ground, to that's like overwintering habitat for all kinds of native insects. More than I'm not an entomologist, but there's just hundreds and thousands of these little bugs that I couldn't tell you what most of them are, but they should be honored, and they should be give them a little home, give them a home for the winter. It's hard enough in the Cape.
Question?
Yeah.
Thank you for, now I don't have to rake my yard. What's the difference in compost and mulch?
Well, so mulch is generally, more thought of as something that's covering the soil. It's generally very carbon heavy. Carbonaceous is actually a word. I didn't say that. It's more like, leaves or shredded leaves or bark mulch or wood chips or straw or hay. It's something that you put on the soil to kind of, honestly, I think of mulch as a placeholder, because my goal, what I'd like to strive for is living mulches and ground covers and things like that. But mulch is a great placeholder. It also, you know, if you're trying to retain moisture around a plant or a tree or a new planting, you know, adding a nice ring of mulch around it to kind of just like help it. It also keeps weeds down. Compost is more like, it's the finished product. I mean, mulch will eventually turn into compost. I mean, that's the beauty of it is by adding mulch, you know, it's like in 10 years, wherever you added that mulch, it's going to be compost or less than that. But so it depends on the scenario. I mean, but you can use compost as a mulch, but you can't use mulch as a compost. It doesn't work that way.
Can you bring up worms and their role in that cycle of leaving the leaves and leaving the grass clippings?
Yeah, I mean worms. If you noticed, worms are like it's crazy because you're like, all right, this area has no worms, but cover it with wood chips and then come back in a month, and then they'll just be worms. They just show up. I don't know how it works, but I don't know, but they just come and they're attracted to mulch. They're attracted to when the ground's not bare. You'll never find worms in just like well, you will if you're digging hard enough and if it's freshly tilled, but they're attracted to, because they're eating the decaying organic matter. And so worms are creating these little tunnels all throughout the soil, and that's like the best aeration you could ask for. They're aerating the soil, which is another reason to try to reduce tilling as much as you can, which I will talk about with the whole no-till thing. But yeah, I mean, of course you can't have enough worms. Except for, I mean, sometimes like there's certain kinds of like root-eating nematodes and stuff like that. But generally, if you have a diversity of microorganisms in the soil and you have the whole food chain of the soil food web, you should be in good shape. And I'm going to talk a little more about that. The one thing about the whole, you're saying now I don't have to clean up my leaves. Of course, you know that if you leave a mat of leaves in the fall, that's going to kill the grass and whatever underneath that. But of course, I mean, the thing what NOFA standards teach is to mow the last mow of the year. Put whatever leaves on the grass. I mean, don't pile up the grass, but whatever leaves that are on the grass, just mow that in, mulch it in. Maybe do a couple passes if you have to, if your blades aren't sharp. And it might be like, oh, I got these little leaf clippings all over the lawn, but it'll just completely decompose, and you're feeding the topsoil, you're feeding the grass. That is a tough one. The whole not doing leaf cleanup in the fall, that's a tough one for most people. Wait till the spring and still do minimal cleanup. So keep as much biomass on the site as possible. We always encourage people to compost on site. It's hard for some people in a tight area. They just don't have enough room to compost like with brush piles and stuff like that. But if you can, mulch, keep your compost, keep your leaves, keep your whatever on site, because it's all about the full circle. If not planting food for human this is my version, this is my little thing. If not planting food for human consumption, try to plant native plants in the landscape. NOFA would just say, plant native plants they're big on native plants. And I'm like, well, most of our food is not native. Most of our vegetables, most of the things that we eat regularly are not native, and the things that we're used to, and the things that bring us joy, like tomatoes and whatnot. So I think like if you're planting food for human consumption, it's okay to not plant natives because you're eating it, and that's cool. But if you're going to plant a plant in the landscape, we strongly try to encourage people to not just plant ornamental, non-native ornamentals that aren't even really, they're not feeding wildlife, they're not really doing anything. They're just there because they look pretty. But plant native. So on that other side of the coin is to remove invasive plants as they show up, and to really know which plants are actually invasive and not just aggressive. I can't tell you how many people have said, oh, I got this invasive goldenrod or whatever it is, or milkweed is so invasive. And those plants are native plants. They just happen to be pretty good at what they do, and they're tough. And it's not to say that they don't. I mean, they don't really belong in a vegetable garden for the most part, like a high maintenance vegetable garden. But put them outside. Put them in the perennial area. And also, not all non-native plants are invasive, too. That's another thing. I mean, there's plenty of non-native plants that actually do feed pollinators and are very good for generalist insects, and are not invasive, and they're totally fine to add to your landscape. But definitely being aware of which plants have an invasive habit, that's important. Keep the soil covered with mulch or ground covers, if not plants, and avoid leaving the soil bare. That's just generally, when you have bare soil, you're going to get erosion, you're going to get runoff, especially in the winter months when you leave soil bare. It's just, you get all that rain and the frost heaving, and that's your topsoil. And that top inch of soil is where so much happens in the microbiome there. And then, of course, never use non-organic herbicides, never use non-organic pesticides. I mean, it even sounds weird saying that, but I mean, vinegar is an organic herbicide, and there's organic pesticides like neem oil is very effective. And so then lastly, minimize water use as much as possible. That's kind of a no-brainer, but I say that and then I drive by and I just see sprinklers going on people's lawns when it's raining outside and stuff like that. That doesn't make sense. Okay, the next section, site analysis. So this is important when you are designing or going to plant and whatnot. This is a lot of no-brainer stuff, so I'm not going to go so deep on each of these, but don't just impose, I'm just going to plant this thing right here without any thought, because, think about the sunny spots, the shady spots, accessibility and circulation. As far as like, where do people flow on your property? Where do you, when you get out of your car? I wish I had a picture of this, but I think it was in my permaculture design, there was a picture of someone designed a walkway, so their driveway comes up, and then there's their front door. They have a walkway that does this like thing, and then you see that there's like this like dirt, straight path made of dirt that they just, clearly that they get out of their car and they just go straight to the door. So those are like when you're really thinking about how you actually move on your property, and do you have kids, are they running around, or do you have dogs and stuff? Prevailing winds, snow drifts, that's great when you have those big snowstorms to see, which areas melt last, and it's like, okay, I'm not going to plant my peas there because that might stay really wet and it might stay really cold when I'm trying to get into the garden in the spring or whatever. Wet areas, dry areas, topography, the contour of the land is huge. The overall ecology and biome, just knowing what plants are on your property and what plants are existing, because they can tell you a lot. Wildlife, that's going to definitely tell you how much, what you can, if you have tons of deer and tons of whatever it is, then you're going to have to either use tree tubes, or if you're establishing trees, or you need fencing. Otherwise, that can be heartbreaking. Soil type and soil quality, pollution, septic, electric lines, oil, gas, dig safe is always smart, call dig safe, blah, blah, blah. But this is all, And identifying the major limiting factors or problems. It's important to identify those problems up front so you can figure out how to make those problems your solution. This was just a cool graphic I found online that shows you the difference in how the sun comes up throughout the year. In the summer solstice, the sun's actually rising in the northeast, and then setting in the northwest. And then in the winter solstice, it's the southeast and doing this. But that, just knowing that, and when you're working with the existing, if you're coming onto a landscape, it's like, okay, these are the existing trees and this is the layout. You can plant certain spring ephemerals underneath an oak tree, because in the spring, that oak that is getting plenty of sun, and so you can plant daffodils or ramps, which is an edible I'll talk about. And then when the oak tree leaves out and the sun's higher, it's actually going to be in full shade. So there's certain plants that love that kind of niche. So still on site analysis, this is me just using an A-frame level. That's really important. Like, so this woman wanted garden beds, but the slope was pretty steeper than what it looks like, and so we had to build the beds on contour so that we're not losing soil to runoff and whatnot. Think about rice paddies, and you see them on the hillsides. Those are all those beautiful. They're on contour. You're not going to put your garden bed going this way. It's just you water. It's just going to go right down the hill. So yeah, when you look at a topographical map, those contour lines, those tell you where you can plant beds and things like that. So the next section here is easy ways to incorporate edibles in the landscape. So one easy way is replacing ornamental trees, shrubs, and perennials with edible species. So you can just go swap it out, plant for plant. And that's sometimes what people do. A lot of times people will buy a property and they'll just be like, we got hydrangeas and rhododendron and azaleas, and it's like, I'd rather grow, food. So you can just swap them out. Or you can augment an existing bed with edible perennials in open spots, even in the shade. A lot of people don't think, I got the shade, I can't really grow edibles. I have a whole section at the end about edible plants that grow great in the shade. So that's just kind of like, that's pretty easy, because you can just say, there's an open spot, let's pop a skirt in there. Talk a little more about skirt, perennial parsnip. Or you can go edible from scratch, kind of clean slate, whether that's, I'm going to just till up this area, or I'm going to sheet mulch this area, I'm just going to go clean slate, or maybe you had to get a new septic system put in, and you have this mess, looks like the moon, just like nothing, and that's a great clean slate to get in there and just go all from scratch. Or a very common thing to do these days is to do the raised bed thing, or box garden. Building them with wood is a thing people like to do, or you can build them with stone or brick and other materials. That way, it's neat, it's clean. You can plop a raised bed just about anywhere where it's getting some sun, and it's a lot easier to maintain, because weeds don't encroach into there as much. So I have some pictures in the next slide of some examples. Or you can do an in-ground veggie garden. So you can, instead of a raised bed, you can actually just go right into the ground, which is a lot cheaper. Or the long-term approach is just to transform over time. So don't try to expect you're just going to do it all at once. You're just going to go from 0 to 60 overnight, but that you're just going to slowly start incorporating edible plants and take the long game approach. So here's just some examples of raised beds that we've done. We've done all kinds of different raised beds, short ones, tall ones, long ones. But if someone has a budget for it, we do recommend doing them with the cedar 4x4s, because cedar's pretty rot resistant. So the 4x4s are just they're beefy, so you can sit on them. They're structural. And I know they're going to last a long time, versus just using like a little 2x10 or something like that is only going to last probably 5 to 8 years or so. Or you can do taller beds, all kinds of ways to do it. This is just a little hack that we discovered. We started doing, so the YMCA garden in West Barnstable, we've been now doing that for 3 years. But when we came on, the beds were falling apart. No one had been managing the garden in a long time. So we piled up wood chips around the beds. So they're not quite raised beds really anymore, but the wood chips are kind of there to keep, so when the beds collapse, they're not just going to collapse. And, you know, it's a low budget way of making a raised bed last longer, kind of bank up wood chips around it. Yep.
What's your view of pressure treated these days?
That's a loaded question, man. Because I mean, honestly, I'll do what if a customer wants to do pressure treated, I'm sure let's do it. But and because I've done a lot of research on it, and I mean, the new pressure treated that they're making doesn't have copper arsenic, and so they used to make it with copper arsenic, which was obviously a big deal, but they don't anymore, and the manufacturers and people selling the pressure treated are definitely saying that it's totally safe to use for growing food and whatnot. I have seen also people do raised bed and then line it with like a plastic or something like that. So that's another way, because pressure treated really does last a long time, and that's the benefit of it. Like those are pressure treated that we did recently, because that's what they were just like, I want pressure treated, I'm fine with it. And I mean, we always tell people, like, you know, there might be risks, and I even one time someone bought a property that had pressure treated raised beds. We took soil samples from all around touching the wood, and we sent them to UMass specifically to test for any contaminants or things that wouldn't be smart to eat. And the test came back and it said it's totally safe, it's fine. So that gave me reassurance that I think it's probably okay. But I think most of our customer base is more on the organic side, so they tend to not even question, they don't want pressure treated, but sometimes people do. But yeah, that's a tough one. I like lose sleep over that one. So then there's, like, you know, I was mentioning in-ground beds. So, you know, you can tell here that we have a style that we like to use a lot of Woodchip mulch for our walkways. And it's basically just years of, it's just bulletproof. I mean, you don't have to worry about weeds, and especially if you're using a fine mulch on top of your garden beds too. I mean, it's pretty weed free, at least for like the first year, and then you keep an eye on it. But of course, weed seeds are going to always blow in from different areas. But we always recommend a lot of mulch in your walkways. It's important to delineate where you can walk and then where you grow food, because you don't really want to step on the beds that you're growing food in, because that's going to compact soil. And more in-ground beds. Clearly, we like wood chips.
Yeah. Wood chips affect the pH at all?
That's a good question. People think there's a lot of misinformation about wood chips, or like scare tactics. I think it's like must be like the mulch industry, because wood chips are like free, you know, and like they're such an amazing thing, and I've done a lot of research on that too. The main thing that they can do is, if they're really fresh wood chips, like green, like just chipped up, they can steal nitrogen from the soil that's around them. But if you're mulching, if you're not mixing the wood chips into the soil, it doesn't do that. As long as it's, and basically what it comes down to is we never really mulch right up against a tender little seedling with wood chips. That's the main thing that you shouldn't do. But with aged wood chips, sure, mulch right up against whatever, little tender seedlings. But with fresh chips just chipped up, they're hot. They want to start breaking down. So they need nitrogen to start breaking down because they're so carbon heavy. But most of the time when we use wood chips, we try to use aged, although that doesn't look like aged chips. Well, it's in the walkway anyway, so that's. And then I do have a slide later on you can inoculate wood chips with mushroom mycelium.
Do you guys in your own business worry about the source of which you're getting your wood chips, or do you guys create your own wood chips and you guys are like burn on only and stuff that you create? Just worried that, you know, you bring something else in, kind of like when we go camping, you bring wood from,
Yeah,
you know,
that's a good question. For the most part, I've never had, I've used so many wood chips, probably hundreds and hundreds of thousands of yards of it. And I've never had like issues of, you know, like some strange pest being in there, or disease, or like weed seeds even. I mean, most of the time wood chips are pretty clean. Like there's no incentive for someone to like want to throw like, be like, I'm just gonna throw some disease in there. But the one thing that that I have heard is that with pine borer, if you have pine chips that are from a pine borer that, you know, was infected with pine borer, you don't want those near a pine tree, basically. But for the most part, that's another good reason to ask for aged chips. And most of the time, all that means is that they just do a couple scoops to get in there, and they get some aged stuff, which is broken down. And most of the time, unless we're doing a mushroom inoculation, we do ask for aged chips, or playground chips, which aren't aged, but they're certified playground chips, which definitely don't have diseased or thorns or weed seeds or anything like that. They're very uniform.
Cardboard underneath most
Definitely,
of your walkways?
yep. Oh yeah, I have a whole slide about that, sheet mulching. So, and then I was mentioning, you know, incorporating edibles into an existing hardscape. That's so easy, you know. Like these are jobs that we've done that people had just kind of ornamental plantings in their hardscape, and we didn't do the hardscape, but they're just like, yeah, I want to grow herbs outside my kitchen, not, you know, like whatever. And so we planted herbs and veggies and greens and whatnot. And then stone beds, I really am, it's not just because I love to like touch the stone and work with stone, but it's really like, I mean, they last forever, relatively speaking. I mean, versus like a wooden raised bed, I mean, it's gonna rot at some point, even if it is pressure treated. In stone, it's different. You can move it around. It's modular. Yeah. But I mean, the tall raised beds are, of course, great for if you have a back issue or whatever. I mean, if you build them. Also, the thing I forgot to mention about raised beds is if you build your bed 20 inches, 22 inches tall at least, then that's bunny proof too. So that's a huge one. Especially this. Big bunny fans here.
They all need to be caged.
Or
we do.
all right, so next I want to talk about is building soil, because I can't emphasize it enough, and I just see the results. Like you can just tell when you have healthy soil, the plants are going to be better. That's from any plant you can think of, from trees to shrubs to vegetables to weeds. I mean, actually, a lot of people say weeds don't grow as well in really good soil, which I'm like confused about that. But I think that's but anyway, so just like a little microscope slide, you know, of like, you know, a healthy soil would have bacteria, it has minerals, protozoa, organic matter, fungi. It's got all kinds of stuff going on. Here's a really great picture. So this is just a pine seedling. And so if these little roots here, this is as far as the pine seedling roots are actually going. But what do you think all of this stuff is? All that stuff, that's the mycelium. That's like the fungal. They're basically roots of a fungus, for lack of a better. It's the network. It's the underground network of what would eventually become the fruiting body, what we know as a mushroom. But this is what's going on under the ground, and so this is not just like a one case scenario. This is like everywhere you go, there's mycelium. I mean, there's mycelium underneath this building right now, without a question. It's there because it's basically everywhere. And so knowing how to, well, just knowing that and knowing that it's there to help the trees for the most part, unless it's like a, you know, saprophytic root-eating fungus, which they do exist. But for the most part, this is a symbiotic relationship. The tree is creating sugars through photosynthesis, and it's actually feeding the mycelium, it's feeding the mushroom sugar, And in exchange, the mycelium is getting is mostly water, but other minerals and nutrients that this tree root can't get to yet, or just isn't there yet. And so this mushroom's like, oh yeah, you want get that sugar? Oh yeah, yeah. You want some water? Oh, I'm gonna go get it. And then it sends it back through the network. And I know that sounds like totally hippie, but it's true. And so this is actually interesting. Back pre-Trump days of the USDA, they were actually promoting healthy soil. So this was actually, you can't even find this information on the USDA website anymore about how healthy soil is the key to, success for organic farming and stuff. But 1 teaspoon of healthy soil contains 100 million to 1 billion individual bacteria. 1 teaspoon of soil contains that many individual bacteria. That's just bacteria. That's not to mention the fungi, protozoa, microarthropods, nematodes. I mean, it's crazy. It's vast. Yeah, so luckily I snagged that graphic back in my heyday. So how do we build soil? So there's many ways you can build soil. One, of course, is composting. Composting is literally building soil. And that can be grass clippings, leaves, hay, straw, kindle scraps, animal bedding, worms, compost tea, seaweed, whatever it takes to make compost happen. Mulch is another way of building soil. And that can be leaves, woodchips, bark mulch, hay, straw, organic, carbonaceous material, lasagna gardening, or seaweed again. I got to put seaweed on there. So tilling less. So I mentioned I was going to talk a little bit about tilling. I'm not anti-tilling at all, and sometimes if we're breaking ground into a new garden, or depending on the scenario, tilling is not like this evil thing that people might say it is. But of course, it definitely is being overdone, and once you get the soil to a place that's good, you don't really have to till it anymore. You want to let the earthworms do the thing, let the fungi, let the mycelial network start happening, because when you till that up, you're putting it through a blender, and it's kind of has to start from scratch again. So basically the opposite of tilling would be, well, the thing you want to do instead of tilling is aerating soil. So creating an aerobic environment is really important. And that can be with tap-rooted cover crops, subsoil ripping, broad fork, let worms be worms. So the main tool that we use, especially because we're mostly doing small gardens, and so if I was on a larger scale, I'd be doing like a subsoil ripper, which is basically like a single steel shank that goes in the ground, and when you pull it through, it aerates the soil, but it doesn't turn the soil. So it kind of like, it lets water and air get in there. But we have a tool called a broad fork, which is a two-handled, basically a two-handled pitchfork ours has 12-inch tines. So you stick that into the soil and you kind of do the dance to get it all the way in, and then you pull it back, and that just like, you see the soil lift up, and then you kind of shake it up, and then, yeah, you do a little bit of disturbance to the soil, but you're not like shredding it apart. And it's amazing, yeah. Getting the aeration is key sometimes. Sometimes that's the main issue. Someone just has really compacted soil. So we want to avoid compaction. Organic soil amendments, as prescribed by a soil test, such as lime and biochar, but don't depend on them because, again, the microorganisms are going to do the work for you of basically turning minerals into plant-available nutrients, and turning organic matter into plant-available nutrients. Biochar. Does anybody here know about biochar?
No.
A couple folks. You're going to definitely hear a lot more about biochar because it's like a newer thing. It's basically char that you inoculate with compost or compost tea. So char, have you ever seen char up close? I wish I should do a whole slide on biochar, but It can be a one-time application, and you can add as much as, I've heard, up to 20% of the soil volume can be biochar, which, that's a lot. I mean, so, it's char, powdered char,
What is charge?
charcoal, sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thanks for keeping me in check. Sometimes I get carried away. So it's charcoal. So you create charcoal through, you know, you can do, if you're doing this on your own, like let's say you have a fire outside, you do a bonfire, put your fire out before it's fully done cooking, and then you'll have all this black charcoal left. Take all that charcoal, if you can grind it up however you can, get it into as small pieces as you can, and then just add that into your compost pile, or build a compost pile on top of your burn pile. And that char will absorb all the nutrients and create a little home for all the bacteria and the microbes, and then you can add that into your garden.
What were you about to say about the magnifying picture of
Oh
the
yeah,
charcoal?
if you look at a piece of charcoal magnified, it looks like just like an English muffin, like nooks and crannies. Just all these little nooks and crannies, because it's the most porous, I think it's like the most porous substance or something on Earth. I mean, don't worry, I just made that up, but it's very porous. It's just like, yeah, and it's very stable. So char can stay stable in the soil for like 10,000 years. They found these deposits, they found these mounds of char in the Amazon that were created by people a long time ago, and they were making biochar back then, and now they call it terra preta, which is like black earth, and they're selling this stuff down in Brazil as this, like, I mean, people are buying it. It's the, you can grow anything. It's like the black gold kind of stuff, but you can make your own biochar, or you can. There's places that make it on Cape, but I mention it because it is a one-time application, and or it can be if you add enough of it, and oh, and it's pH neutral. So that's the really cool thing about it too, is most of us on Cape have acidic soil, so if you add char, you're not necessarily going to boost your pH up, but you're at least bringing it closer to neutral, so that's a good thing. Okay. So this is just like I have 2 slides about the soil food web, because I was talking about how important it is to have the microorganisms happy, because they're feeding your plants. So you have this cycle where you have organic matter, and that can be leaves, it can be sticks, it can be animal poop, it can be anything organic. I mean, minerals, and then you have fungi and bacteria, which are the first primary consumers, which are breaking that down. And it's either their poop, basically, which feeds the plants, or their dead bodies if they die. It sounds crazy, and I'm not actually making this up. Or they get eaten by protozoa or microarthropods or nematodes, and then either their poop or their dead bodies are what have plant available nutrients for the plants. So the main takeaway here, and what they've proven, and the latest soil science is proving that you can take pure sand, you can take pure clay, you can take rocks. I mean, you can take whatever soil you start with, and if you have the biology, if you basically add compost tea, that's a good brew of all these microorganisms, you can turn any soil into perfectly good, healthy soil that plants can use to live, because they're being able to break down the minerals and make plant available. All the minerals are there, the NPK and the iron and the calcium, they're in the ground already. It's just how do you make those nutrients plant available, and that's what the microorganisms do. So the soil food web, this is all like, we should have known this stuff like once we invented microscopes, but I think the chemical companies got in the way of that science, and now this is like, only in the last like 20 years has the soil food web been like even a thing.
Do you still recommend keeping weeds out of compost piles?
Definitely weed seeds. I mean, definitely, well, depends on how much you're cooking compost. And actually, let me talk about that on this slide. So if you make proper compost and if you actually cook the compost, it doesn't really matter what weeds or weed seeds you put in there because technically you're cooking it and you're gonna make the seeds not viable anymore. And the biggest takeaway with composting, that if you can just imagine 3 parts brown to 1 part green. So like 75% leaves and 25% grass clippings. That's like, or kitchen scraps are green, and browns could be sawdust or leaves or wood chips or cardboard or newspaper. But the biggest thing I see most people doing wrong with composting is they just add all these kitchen scraps and they don't add any browns into it, and then you get an anaerobic. Then you get a gross like that's when it smells gross because it's just not composting right. But if you do the right browns and greens, then it actually smells fine. And the best way to cook compost, which can kill the pathogens and weed seeds, is a 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot pile. And if it's 131 degrees for 3 days, then you've got a good cooked compost that shouldn't have any weed seeds or pathogens.
How do you heat it?
It heats itself. Yeah. So when you make this magic formula, it generates heat.
You put it in the sun or you?
No, it generates its own heat. You can do this in the wintertime. And I mean, New Alchemy was doing this back in the day. They were creating greenhouses that were heated by compost. It's amazing stuff. We've known this stuff for a long time, and we're, it's silly that we haven't been using this kind of, it's like no-brainer stuff. So okay, next topic here is the grass to garden conversion. That's a big one because a lot of people they're always will be like, I'm sick of my grass, I'm sick of mowing, how do I want to grow food instead? So the quickest and easiest way to go from grass to garden is what we call sheet mulching. That's our style of sheet mulching, but some people would call it lasagna gardening. But basically, I actually remembered to take pictures on this job this past spring, so I have a cool little thing. But we don't always do it, but this case we actually buzzed the grass with a weed whacker. And now this is my guy using the broad fork. So that's so he's aerating the soil, and then we did about an inch of compost on top of the grass. Then we added cardboard and then wood chips on top of that. And it doesn't look like much of a garden now, but it's a really easy way to just have no weeds, and you're just boosting it with biology, with the compost, and you're smothering out, and it's worms are attracting there, and in the next 2 slides I'll show you how to plant into that.
Could you just go over that, section by section,
Yeah.
which step, how did you go from just grass that you jiggled the thing into the next one?
Okay.
Yeah.
So first we buzzed it with a weed whacker, which we don't really have to do, but I did it because I told the customer I would do it, and I better do it. I told them I'd do it, but you don't really have to do it if you're using cardboard. And so then we just added a top dressing of compost, probably about an inch across this area, and then you start doing. You could do all the cardboard at once, and then, but we do it in as we go. So we'll do a section of cardboard, and then we'll do wood chips, and then we'll overlap cardboard for the next section. So that way you're not rolling over cardboard with wheelbarrows. But if you wet it, it'll stay in place more. But so yeah, that's basically just cardboard. And if you're using cardboard, you want to obviously peel the tape off, and don't use cardboard with ink. The black ink is supposed to be water-based and staples and stuff, but we actually buy these rolls of just cardboard that obviously has nothing else in it but cardboard, which does just break down into soil. And then, yeah, just wood chips on top of that. And then in 2 slides, I'll show you how to, when you want to plant into it, you just kind of pull back the wood chips, cut a hole in the cardboard. It's definitely not, if you wanted to do a veggie garden in this style, you would basically want to add, if I was going to do a veggie garden with the grass to garden with sheet mulching, I'll do cardboard, and then I'd use a lot of compost on top of that, because I want to plant right into that, so I want to use like 6 to 8 inches of compost on there. And then by the time, even the annuals, whatever it is, by the time they're growing enough to send roots down, they can actually get into the cardboard. And I've never had like any issues. I mean, the only time, if you went really thin with compost on top of cardboard, you'd know. I mean, you wouldn't want to plant into it. But if you go thick enough, actually, I do have a slide of that. So then it's also could be called lasagna gardening. This is a little more when you're creating these layers. So if you go thick enough, honestly, if you go thick enough with any kind of mulch, you don't even need the cardboard. That's the thing. I mean, we've smothered out large sections of grass with just going thick with leaves or wood chips. You don't need to do the cardboard if you're going thick enough. So this has cardboard, has coarse nitrogen, so plant clippings and whatnot, and then it has coarse carbon, so this is like sticks and twigs, and then medium nitrogen, medium carbon, fine nitrogen. Now, that's next level, all these different layers, but the cool thing about that is you're creating like this, you're creating a compost pile right there where you're going to plant into. So that's pretty cool. So this slide here is actually sheet mulching step by step. Another one that I actually took pictures of while I was up going. So this was a burning bush that we have since actually just taken the whole thing down. But you know how burning bush leaves those little tiny seedlings everywhere? So it was just, you can't really see them from the picture, but it was just full of these little tiny seedlings. And I was just like, I don't want to sit here and pull them all up. So we just, cardboard. The next step would be mulching over everything. And then this shows that you're pulling the wood chips back to get to the cardboard, cutting a hole in the cardboard to get to the dirt. You dig it out, and we're planting a gooseberry there, and then kind of tuck it all back in, and then it's a pretty easy way to not worry about weeds and just smother out the weeds and just plant right in. You had a question?
So how long would it take before you start planting something in there?
So you could plant like here. I planted right away.
Oh, okay.
So as long as you make sure you're actually planting something into the parent soil, then you can plant right away. Or honestly, like we'll do sheet mulching as like a placeholder sometimes. Like if someone's like, I got all these weeds and I know I want to do a garden here someday, but so we'll just smother out the weeds and put wood chips on there or mulch, and then people can go as they go. And we've successfully smothered out with sheet mulching with cardboard. We've almost any weed you could think of except for Japanese knotweed if it can work with sheet mulching.
Oh, excuse me. Can you give an example of fine nitrogen and fine carbon?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say fine nitrogen would be like grass clippings, like.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then fine carbon, I guess really fine carbon would be either like a bark mulch or like sawdust, but realistically in this scenario it would probably be a bark mulch.
Could you kill bamboo like that?
You got me there. Yeah. If I was gonna do so we're currently we're 2.5 years into smothering out a giant stand of Japanese knotweed with rubber roofing. So this rolls of rubber roofing, and we've almost got it. And I imagine it would work too with bamboo.
Cook it, right?
Cook it, but also just starve it. Just smother it and starve it. It doesn't get light, it doesn't get water, it doesn't get, I'm hoping that next year the knotweed will be. It's only coming up in the cracks where you know, where we had one sheet and another sheet, but we keep pulling it from the cracks. So because I mean, yeah, this particular customer is like, I don't want to use chemicals, but I got this knotweed, I want to get rid of it. So yeah, that's one way. Another thing to do, if you have bamboo, unless you really want to spend like the rest of your life trying to eradicate it, you could kind of pick your boundary and just say, all right, and dig a rhizome barrier, find a place that you're comfortable with, and just stop the bamboo from spreading. Stop it where it is. So digging a rhizome barrier is basically dig a 2-foot trench, which is actually a lot of work, and line it with thick plastic. And if you go to rhizomebarriers.com, they have all the different kinds of sizes, and it's this thick plastic. I don't recommend putting plastic into the ground very much, but in this scenario, it's the one time where plastics, persistence in the earth works to your advantage, because you just create an underground wall for the bamboo rhizomes. They just can't get past it. So that's, if you have bamboo, either you're going to be spending a lot of time trying to eradicate it, or just say, all right, I'm going to deal with you, but you're not coming any further, with a rhizome barrier.
Can you mulch it though? Can you mulch bamboo when you cut it down? Can you stick it in the pot?
Mulch it. Honestly, you probably can. Definitely if you shredded it, but I'm pretty sure the landscape yards don't accept bamboo now, because I think there's probably been enough cases of people. But I think if it's just the top of the plant, I can't see how it's not gonna regrow. But I'm sure there's probably been people in the past who are like, oh yeah, I just got bamboo and I shredded it all up, but then there was like giant root balls, and then and all it takes is probably one person to get like I got bamboo in my Woodchips, and then yeah.
I know that knotweed, when it's in its shoot stage, is actually quite good.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people eat it like asparagus.
Totally.
Do you have any customers that are growing it for edible use, knowing that it can be aggressive?
No, I don't have anyone growing it intentionally. But you don't have to, because it's just everywhere. But the one thing is that when you're foraging for Japanese knotweed, it generally is growing on roadsides and disturbed areas and polluted areas.
I was just gonna say that's polluted.
Yeah, but you can find clean stands of it, but yeah, we actually have a native relative to knotweed. It's the woodland knotweed, and I actually have that growing because it's not invasive at all. It's native and it's short. But I was like, I'm curious about this. I mean, it's edible, and same genus. All right. So another thing you can do if you're sheet mulching, or anytime you're adding wood chips, is you can inoculate the wood chips with mushroom spawn, particularly Stropharia, which is common name is wine cap, which grows really easily. So this is just like a little step-by-step of we're smothering out garlic mustard, which also happens to be a very tasty wild edible, like one of my favorite foraging foods, but it's also incredibly invasive. So we're smothering out the knotweed with cardboard, the wood chips, and now we're spreading mushroom spawn, and then we're going to do another thin layer of wood chips on top of that. And already we did this job in the early spring. And then I went back there a few weeks ago, and I was just poking around in the wood chips. It's spread. The mycelium has already spread like 5 times the area that we originally kind of just dusted it into. So as long as you keep it moist. And then yeah, this is pictures of wine cap that just will grow for years in the area that you've inoculated. And then what you can do is once you have an area that you know is inoculated with wine caps, you can then take clumps of those wood chips and inoculate other areas. And this mushroom just works really great for the garden because it can totally do full sun. And it's not picky about what substrate it eats. I mean, any kind of garden people just put, this is known as like the garden giant too. People just add it in their gardens, and it's a tasty mushroom and it's gourmet. So then, well, I figure while we're on the topic of mushrooms, if you've got a lot of shade, grow a mushroom. Unfortunately, I got to these shiitakes too late. You can see they're all flappy, but you know, if we got all this oak on Cape Cod, and trees are coming down like all the time, and it's a shame. I mean, but grow mushrooms on that. And I always try to tell, if there's anyone who does tree work, I'm always like, okay, you could make a killing off of doing shiitake mushrooms. You're cutting down oak logs all day long, and you could just inoculate those things with shiitake, and that's a high value mushroom. So, okay, next topic is food forests. I told you I'd talk about that. So this is a demonstration food forest that we put in at the Audubon Long Pasture in Barnstable with our group, the Food Forest Initiative, and Edible Landscapes in cahoots. But this is the panel that we made for it, and so I might as well just read it to you because we came up with the wording. A food forest integrates trees, shrubs, perennial plants, and ground covers to mimic a woodland ecosystem. By planting native, edible, and medicinal plants, we are not only feeding ourselves, but we are also feeding and creating habitat for local wildlife. This food forest is a model of what regenerative, restorative agriculture can look like. Traditional agriculture contributes to global climate change and pollution. Food forests require no tillage or fertilizers because they incorporate trees and a wide variety of plants and shrubs. This system reduces soil erosion and water pollution and can help to mitigate climate change by sequestering carbon. So, when it comes to the future of agriculture, if we have any hope of surviving on this planet, you know, a few more generations at least, we need to be growing food in this way of incorporating trees. Basically, planting more trees is our mission as a human species right now. We should be planting more trees, especially in any area that's degraded and deserted. And so if we're planting trees, why not plant edible trees that feed us and don't need to be fertilized and don't need to be, you know, tilled in and ripped up and blah, blah, blah every year. So, yeah. So this visual is awesome. I stumbled across this, I didn't make this, but it says a lot. So you see you've got the canopy, the tall trees, and then you've got, you know, medium trees, small trees, understory trees, shrubs, forbs, which I basically just call a herbaceous perennial. But if you, so you got to know that south is this way, north is that way. So remember how I was showing you that diagram earlier of how the sun moves throughout the season? So imagine, you know, the sun's doing this, and so it's always going to be coming in at this angle, whether it's here, or there. So when you put your tallest tree species in the back on the northern part, and your smaller things in the front, like your ground covers and your small shrubs, you can actually pack a lot of plants into a small place. And this is just a concept that it doesn't have to be trees and whatnot. I mean, we do this in landscape design all the time. It's like you put your tallest stuff where it's going to be able to get the sun and not shade out the shorter things that can't get as tall. But I like how this whatever you call it, slide has some examples of what some tall trees, so oaks, hickory, pecan, black walnut, American persimmon, American chestnut, locust. So medium trees might be European and Asian chestnut, English walnut, wild pear, sassafras, heartnut, and then you have some understory trees, which might be, what's the understory trees? Small trees. Plum, apple, apricot, pear, quince, pawpaw, hawthorn, medlar. You know, these are just like some total examples, but just random, but gets your gears turned. And then of course there's the you know, people will call it, they'll say like, you know, the rhizosphere as the underground layer. So there's all these layers of a forest that we can mimic and create a food system instead of just, you know, a forest that's not necessarily feeding us. So some more little pictures of food forests. Our group, the Food Forest Initiative, did like a mini food forest demonstration at the Lighthouse Charter School in Harwich, where so down here is actually is about 5 different cultivars of American persimmon, and then up here there's more different cultivars of American hazelnut. So this is also an example of alley cropping. So we're trying to show the kids that there's a whole different way of doing agriculture. So alley cropping, as I mentioned before, so we're growing trees in these wider spacings, but in the middle, these areas get a lot of sun for the next 5 years. They're going to get plenty of sun, so we're growing, you know, corn, beans, and squash, and potatoes in the alleys. We did a food forest at a little mini food forest at Meeting House Farm in West Barnstable, where we got pawpaws and currants and gooseberry and gumi and seaberry and honeyberry. And this is just an ongoing project for a customer in Orleans that's doing wanting to convert her backyard to a food forest. So it's all about the plants. That's really what makes what we do, or what makes edible landscaping edible. It's your landscaping, and for the most part, your tools and your methods are the same, but you're really trying to incorporate edible plants as much as you can into the landscape. And we feel like when incorporating edible plants into the landscape for long-term ease of maintenance, incorporating edible perennials is important. That's really, to me, what makes a landscape plant a landscape plant. It's something that you can plant it in your landscape, and it's gonna grow year after year. It's gonna get bigger. It's not something that you have to, you know, replant every year. To me, that's more of like a garden. A garden is something that you're working in year after year. You're replanting, but a landscape is something. Let's plant the landscape. Let's plant perennials into the landscape, and let's plant our annuals in the garden. Let's see. So the right plant for the right place is very important here. Every plant has a particular habit, shape, and form. Reading the cues in the landscape, determining which plant is right for its place, and then keeping succession in mind. You know, some plants are going to get really big. Some plants are going to want to move around. Some plants self-seed. Some plants creep. Some plants they all do their thing to keep going. And knowing how they work is really important. You know, for instance, like if you have some really aggressive plants, you don't want to put them right next to your dainty plants that need the real babying. You put aggressive plants with aggressive plants, and the real fine plants that need coddling with the fine plants that need coddling. I've learned that the hard way too many times. And then a thing about edible perennials is, for the most part, they aren't really bred to be landscape plants, like in the nursery trade, much like the common nursery plants are very well-behaved landscape plants. You know, that's why we love, well, not we, but people love hydrangeas so much. I don't hate hydrangeas. I don't hate any plant, but because they stay put and they look the same about every year. You know, they barely really need pruning, although we tend to do it. But so a lot of the edible perennials, they kind of have a mind of their own. So knowing how they work is key. All right, so this gets me to this section, which is I have all these lists of the different plants for the landscape. So these are all perennial plants. I got to emphasize that. You'd be like, well, why isn't lettuce on there, or why isn't potatoes or something? Even though technically potatoes are perennial, but just not so much in Arizona. But so these are strictly perennial plants, because that's what I'm obsessed with, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Before we start getting crazy on that, anyone have any questions?
Do you recommend worm farms getting those kits that will start worms to get you started? Or do you assume that if you do the right compost, they will come?
They will come. They will absolutely come. You don't even have to add worms. I mean, the worms that will come are like the earthworms and the night crawlers. The worms that are commonly used for the worm farms, like the little home scales, are people use red wigglers, which aren't actually native and don't necessarily. They need like a warmer habitat to overwinter in, but they can overwinter in a compost pile. So you can inoculate your compost pile with red wigglers if you know it's going to stay warm enough in the winter. But it's a fun thing to do anyways. It's kind of cool to have the worms. We did it, I did it with my niece, and but it was like attracting all these like fruit flies and stuff in the kitchens and everything. But yeah, yeah. But if you start mulching the ground, like the worms will just show up. It's crazy. All right, so now we're yep.
Do you know if rainwater collection is legal in Falmouth or on Cape Cod?
That's a good question. I've heard things that it's illegal in certain areas. I've definitely heard about that. I've definitely never heard that that's an issue here. I've never heard of it being illegal. But I know in certain counties that in the country it is illegal to catch rainwater, which seems crazy.
Why?
I don't know.
Is there a reason behind that?
I guess maybe for health, maybe because it might breed mosquitoes. But obviously, if you do it right, it's not.
Because it's water rights.
Yeah, water rights to like
You're taking it from somebody else
Right.
to interrupt the stream of water.
Yeah.
By collecting it, you're taking it from somebody who owns it.
Yeah, yeah, someone who has water rights downstream. Yeah. So, I'm gonna start talking about the different edible perennials. So it's edible. There's some medicinal plants that are mixed in that aren't necessarily something you're gonna eat, like chow on, but it might be something you make a tea with. But still, it can be considered edible. All right, so
And this is available on the PDF?
yeah, so if you sign up, put your email on that yellow piece of paper over there. I can send this as a PDF, so you don't have to write all this down.
Yes,
that's
wonderful.
Yeah, and then if you want to hang with the Food Forest Initiative, we're always trying to get more people involved. Make a little note. I want to join Food Forest Initiative. That's just a totally different thing. But. All right, so the shade-loving edible perennials. And I have it broken down into native and non-native for all these sections because I think the native thing is important, and in a perfect world, we would be starting to design our landscapes and agricultural lands to be incorporating more native edibles. So in the native section, we got ramps. That's a native allium. It's like a native leek. It grows in the forest. We don't really have that. So when I say native, I'm definitely being loose with it in the sense that I'm not strict Cape Cod native, but native to the northeastern U.S. And even like, going down to southeastern a little bit, because also with climate change, a lot of the southern species are definitely finding their way up north, and people predict that we'll be growing avocados in 5 years. But it's not. I wouldn't doubt it. So ramps, wintergreen is a classic ground cover for the forest. It also does really well in like a garden setting, like as a ground cover. It's pretty easy. It's not very difficult. Solomon seal. Most people don't know that those are edible. The shoots are edible. If you can snap them like asparagus, then you can eat them cooked. Mayapple. Anyone ever grow mayapple?
Yeah.
Know about it? So this is a beautiful native. It only gets about 1 foot tall. It loves the shade, and it produces these little edible fruits. Have you ever tried the fruit?
No.
Yeah, so the fruit has a bad reputation because probably because someone called it mayapple. They're like, oh, I'm going to harvest this in May and eat it. That's when it's poisonous. So I think people are like, oh, mayapple is poisonous. But potatoes are poisonous when they're raw. You don't eat potatoes when they're raw. So it's just knowing about how the plant works. So when you wait till this fruit ripens, in like the later summer. It's still not ripe yet. It's the most amazing. It tastes like a guava, like a tropical fruit. I can't. It tastes tropical, and it's native here. Wild ginger. I apologize that I don't have Latin names because it was really frustrating making this chart in itself, and then when I started adding Latin, it started looking weird, and I was like, oh, people don't even care about the Latin names. But it can be confusing when you're going with common names. But for the most part, if you Google any of these plants, there should be no mistake. If there would be a mistake, I've included Latin next to it. But for the most part, you know, wild ginger, the native wild ginger, ostrich fern, fiddlehead fern, spikenard, American spikenard has edible berries, does great in shade. It actually is sort of even like a small shrub when it's full size, and then it dies to the ground every winter. Bracken fern, again a fiddlehead fern. American ginseng, I only added that not because it's easy to grow, because it's actually really hard to grow, but that it's basically endangered. And so that would be something worth trying to grow more of, because I don't want to be alive during the extinction of American ginseng. And I feel like we're at a time when you can buy things online. Our grandkids will be like, you could have saved the planet. You could have like created these food systems. You could have like, you know, ordered these things online. Like, why didn't you do that? I'm like, oh, well, yeah. I didn't think. We could be like saving American ginseng right now from extinction if we like started propagating it. Golden seal too. That's getting more and more rare. Same with Indian cucumber. In fact, I would say grow it only to not eat it, so that you can, because all these plants are on their way to becoming endangered. Trout lily is a type of lily. Toothwort is like a native. It's kind of like a wasabi. It's the closest thing to a native wasabi. It's these little roots that you can dig up that look like teeth. They actually look like little hard teeth, but they taste like wasabi or horseradish. Native strawberries, Frigeria virginiana. Wood nettle is so we have stinging nettle, everyone knows about, everyone hates it. But wood nettle is closely related, and it's native. And it can be eaten just the same if you cook it, so you cook the stinging hairs off of it. So in the non-native section, this plant called skirret. This is a perennial, basically a perennial parsnip. It's related to parsnips and carrots in that family. This is one of the perennials that you have to dig it up. So it's not just like stay in the ground all the time. You got to dig it up, you harvest the white roots, and then you replant the crowns of the plant. But every year, it'll increase by fivefold or whatever it is. It's kind of like you can propagate this plant exponentially. And that's what I've done. That's why now we are offering it in our nursery. I'm at a point with it where I have a garden bed. I have one bed probably from here to the door about this wide. And I'm going to dig it up this fall. I'm going to harvest a ton of it, and then I'm going to double my bed. So these plants, if you can start propagating them and make a lot of food. Sweet Sicily. That's a native. If you like, sorry, not native. It's a edible plant that if you like licorice, you will love it. Some people hate licorice. It's always like 50-50, and if you hate it, you really hate licorice. But I will say, if you hate licorice, you should at least try a real plant like Sweet Sicily or fennel, because it might change your mind about licorice. Instead of like some fake artificially flavored candy that tastes like licorice, if you try the real plant, you might actually go, oh, I feel it. So fuki is a Japanese vegetable with edible stalks that grows well in the shade, moist shade. Mitsuba is a perennial herb that just has a flavor that's indescribable, but it's very unique and tasty. Horseradish. Everyone should have horseradish. We're in Cape Cod. If you eat shellfish, grow your own horseradish, make your own horseradish sauce. And it grows like a weed. Don't till your horseradish plant, or you will have mini horseradish plants all across your garden for the rest of your life. Daylily, the common daylily that grows all across the Cape, is edible. The young shoots, the green shoots out of the ground, can be eaten when cooked. The first year tubers can be cooked and eaten. And the part that you can eat raw is like individual flower petals on daylily. So if it's open, you can peel the flower apart, you can eat them or throw them in salad. And then of course the unopened flower buds, you can cook them or fry them or whatever. Lemon balm is a classic, more in the herb section. Hardy ginger. So there's a ginger that's a true ginger, the Zinzibur genus. And this one's called Zinzibur miyoga. This one is a true ginger, so not like our wild ginger, which is not actually a true ginger. This one is a true ginger, and it's super hardy, and mine's in year 2, and it's romping. We made it through the winter, and it's doing great. I have a few of them. Saffron crocus is the saffron, the spice, the herb, or the whatever seasoning, whatever you want to call it. Sweet coltsfoot, anise hyssop, again with the licorice flavor. Comfrey, I put that on there. Some people will say that you can eat, like, comfrey, but then some people say you can't. You definitely shouldn't eat too much of it, but at least it's not debatable that you can absolutely eat the flowers, which are delicious and have a cucumber flavor like borage. It's in the same family as borage. Alpine strawberry, mushrooms, and any of the mint species will do great in the shade. That's my daughter out there. Sunny edible perennials. So hog peanut, that's a legume that you need something to climb up on. Fireweed, the young shoots in the spring. Jerusalem artichoke, so also known as sunchoke, which I'm sure some people have that plant here. And you're probably regretting planting it because it's really hard to get rid of once you plant it. Yeah. So definitely plant that somewhere where you are going to be okay with having it forever. And the trick with that, though, is also harvesting it after the winter and just before it starts to sprout again. That's when you want to harvest it because the starches have converted to sugar a little bit more from the winter, and it'll give you less gas. I'm not going to say it's going to give you no gas, but if you want a no gas version of Jerusalem artichoke, you can ferment it, like pickle it, and that's what we did and clean. So cranberry, also that's native and can grow in a garden setting. Just don't let the weeds, definitely it needs to kind of get established, and once it's established, it can grow as a garden plant. Beach pea. Yarrow.
Skip over that the yarrow.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't. So yarrow is, I did not on purpose. I did skip over it. Yarrow is, it's more of a medicinal herb than an edible. But it's worth having around. It's a great beneficial insect attractor, and it's a great ground cover, and it stays green like almost all year round, even in like the coldest months. So it's good to have green things in the garden when it's that cold. Beach peas, there's a wild pea that grows on the beaches. You'll see them around here, and those can be eaten. Probably better cooked than eaten raw. Sweet fern, more of a medicinal, kind of like a tea kind of thing. Groundnut, that's a native plant, Apios americana, with edible tubers. Anyone ever try growing that? That's a good one. That one actually can produce a good amount of food. It's basically like an underground bean. I gotta have pictures. When I update this presentation, I'm gonna have pictures on it. Mountain mint, a native mountain mint, so it doesn't spread nearly as fast as your average mint that you're used to, and tastes just like mint. It tastes, more on the peppermint side. Wild strawberry shows up again. There's a lot of plants that will show up in multiple categories because maybe it can do good in the sun and the shade. It is good ground cover, so you'll see. Ground cherry, we do have a native ground cherry. Cow parsnip, wild bergamot, which is like bee balm. Rhodiola rosea, which is more on the medicinal side as well. So non-native. Yep.
How do you eat
prickly pear.
Oh, prickly pear. I skipped it, sorry. Prickly pear, you can eat it just like cactus pads. So if you take the thorns out, just like, so it's the same gene as, what do they call the prickly pear that everyone eats in the Southwest? Someone say it? Anyways, it's the same genus, Optunia. So it's the common prickly pear that it's commonly eaten in the desert and in Mexico. So most people don't even know, but it is native to the Northeast. I can't remember the species, Optunia, off the top of my head. But if you Google native prickly pear Northeast, you'll find out. And then of course you can eat the fruits. The fruits are like delicious. They're sweet. Groundnut mountain prickly pear, wild strawberry, did those. So non-native asparagus. That's the most common perennial vegetable around. Rhubarb, strawberry, like the classic hybrid strawberry. Turkish rocket. Oh, I brought some for her. Maybe she'll come back in the end. But she asked for some Turkish rocket. So that's basically a perennial broccoli rabe. If you like broccoli rabe, and some do, some don't, it's got the bitter, but it's a perennial relative to broccoli rabe. I mean, it's in that family. Good King Henry is a funny common name for a plant that's perennial spinach. It looks like spinach, it tastes better than spinach, honestly, when you cook it. It's not one for eating raw, you gotta cook it. Skirret shows up again, I mentioned that one earlier. Chinese artichoke is also known as mint root. It's good ground cover, spreads pretty good, and the underground tubers, you dig them up, and they're like water chestnuts. They taste like water chestnuts, kind of minty too. Someone say something? Or a question? Salad burnet, that's just something that, edible greens. Elephant garlic is big fat garlic heads that you can leave in the ground as a perennial, or you can dig it up like normal garlic, but it's beautiful because it looks just like globalium, like when it sends up its flowers. So right now it's finishing flowering, but you couldn't tell it from a globalium. You'd think it's an ornamental allium in the garden, but it's an edible. Technically all alliums are edible, though, if you're ever in a survival pinch. Walking onion. This one is amazing. Egyptian walking onion or top-setting onion. So one of the most, it's probably like the one plant that we eat the most all throughout the year because it's, as a green onion, you can harvest it any time of the year. And basically you can just dust the snow off it, harvest it. It's incredibly hardy. It's one plant that you get a ton of mileage from, and it propagates itself like wildfire, so it's great. Sea kale. I can't say enough good about sea kale. It's a perennial kale. It's amazing. It's easy to grow. Once it's established, it grows like a weed. The whole plant is edible, and it's got more of a complex flavor than just regular kale. It's more for cooking. It's really, really good. French sorrel, or any kind of sorrel with the sour leaves. Fennel. That's just like a weed for us, but it's a beautiful perennial. I mean, I eat it all the time whenever I'm in the gardens. My rule for eating things, generally speaking, works for most things, is if you can snap it and it breaks, then it's generally pretty good to just stick in your mouth and chew on it. But if you try to snap it and it's like, it doesn't break, and it's a little, that means it's starting to get woody. And you guys know what I mean? So like think about asparagus. Like when asparagus, when you can't snap it, that's when it's too woody. But if you go a little higher up on the stem, you can snap it, so you can eat it from there. But so a lot of these plants, like fennel or fireweed when it's early, or asparagus, or Turkish rocket, when that can be snapped, that's when it's edible. Garlic scapes, if you can snap them off, I like that. So then ground cover edible perennials. So native strawberry, wintergreen, dewberry. A lot of people curse this plant because when people don't know what it is and they try to pull it and then they get thorns. But it's actually, it's in the rubus genus, which is blackberry and raspberry. And it's basically a ground cover Blackberry. You've seen it. Everyone's seen it, but probably cursed it to death. But it's, you know, it's edible. Creeping snowberries, more of like a woodland plant. There's wild ginger again. Creeping juniper. I only put that on there for the edible juniper berries, which you can make gin with. You can eat them. There is a prime window that you can just pop juniper berries in your mouth. Like, yeah, they're pretty good. And they're very, I think it's vitamin C that they're really high in. Bearberry is, grows along eroded kind of hills and gets in sunny areas, but it does have edible berries, but they don't taste really like anything. But they're edible. Cranberry. Mayflower has edible flowers. That's our state flower, trailing arbutus. Blue violets, of course you can eat the violet flowers themselves, or you can actually cook the greens and eat violet greens, and they're pretty good. Tastes like spinach. A lot of greens taste like spinach. Mayapple shows up there again. But violet, a lot of people are like, oh, that's a weed, isn't it? And it's like, well, what is a weed? But it's a great one to mix into grass. Yeah. Hybrid strawberry, alpine strawberry in the non-native section, creeping thyme, Roman chamomile, Chinese artichoke, water celery. I do have that in our nursery. It's delicious. Tastes just like celery. Grows as a ground cover. If you like celery.
Does it grow as stalks or just leaves?
It does grow as little thin stalks.
Okay.
Yep. And it does have a better window, like in the early spring, when it's just coming out. It's tender and tastier. But I've heard if you keep cutting it back, it'll send up tender growth, and those tender growth. Pizza Night is a variety of oregano that is a ground cover. It works great in like rock patio. If you have like bluestone and you're looking for plants in between, this plant is great. You can step all over it. Basically, any of these plants are great for those settings. Creeping thyme, of course, Roman chamomile, and the mints, of course. Edible perennials, small shrub / large herb. So these are small shrubs and large herbs. American currant, red raspberry, black raspberry, flowering raspberry, also blackberry should be on there too. Jerusalem artichoke, low bush blueberry, huckleberry. Most people think that they're looking at a blueberry when they're actually looking at a huckleberry. We have huckleberries are more common here than most people think, but in the woods, they're basically, there's the high bush blueberry, which are really tall. You can tell they're high bush. And then there's the low bush blueberry, really short. The guy in the middle, that's generally a huckleberry, unless it's, there's other kind of like blueberry like hybrids. I mean, there could be blueberries, but for the most part, if it's like the mid-sized one that you think is blueberries, it could most likely be huckleberry. New Jersey tea, that's more of a tea plant. American spikenard, I mentioned it earlier. Running Juneberry is a short version of serviceberry. Doesn't get that tall, and sweet fern again. In the non-native section, Nanking cherry, which is like a bush cherry, which is a lot easier to grow than other cherries. It is less prone to, well, you don't have to prune it. And honeyberry. I've talked to people who grow honeyberry on Cape with great luck. My honeyberries aren't great, but maybe I just got the wrong variety. But that's like actually, it's in the honeysuckle genus, and it produces these sweet little blue berries. Siberian pea shrub is a shrub that actually produces edible peas. Udo, Aurelia cordata, is a Japanese, very popular Japanese vegetable that you eat the shoots from in the spring. Goji berry. We can totally grow that here, and I've talked to people who've grown have great crops of goji berry, but mine hasn't ever been that good. You can also eat the leaves on goji berry as like a green. Fennel again, and lovage. Lovage is like a perennial kind of a celery. It makes great soup stocks, like starting a soup. Edible shrub / bush form. There's some really good ones in here. American hazelnut and beaked hazelnut. Elderberries, aronia, Rhonia melancarpa, chinkapin, which is basically a bush chestnut. It's native, and it's not as, doesn't really get the blight. I think it might get a little bit of the chestnut blight, but it still gives you nuts and high bush cranberry, which is a type of viburnum with edible berries, but you got to wait till the frost comes in and then the berries get a little bit easier to eat. High bush blueberries, all the service berries, which are unfortunately very prone to apple cedar rust. Anyone grow good service berries here? Service berries are the Amelanchier genus.
Oh.
Yeah, they're common in the landscape trade as just ornamental trees, but they're totally edible and they're very tasty berries. But then they get the apple cedar rust. Huckleberry, I mentioned. Spice bush. This Linzera benzoin does great in like full shade. Bayberry. That's a common one. You've all seen it, but most people don't know that if you're ever doing a recipe that calls for bay leaves, you can add bayberry leaf. It's related to like bay laurel and other bays, and the leaves can be used as like a seasoning or as a substitute for bay. Beach plum, of course, needs no introduction. But one of our next pipe dreams with the Food Forest Initiative is to convince some land trust out there to let's install a U-pick beach plum orchard, or kind of a foraging place, because people get really competitive about their beach plums in the fall. I mean, if you're a beach plum forager, then you've got your spot and it's nailed down, and someone else comes and cleans out your bush before you get all peeved. But I think we could get a lot of people behind like a U-pick beach plum. But that could raise money for the land trust, so like people come and they either you weigh it or you just donate it. If anyone wants to talk about that. Northern red currant, American gooseberry, squashberry, which is a type of viburnum. Again, so edible shrub bush. Nanking cherry shows up good. Honeyberry, seaberry is also called sea buckthorn. It's also a nitrogen fixer. Gumi is also a nitrogen fixer. Gumi is very closely related to autumn olive, actually, but it's a non-invasive type of autumn olive. And autumn olive has very tasty berries if you've never tried those in the fall. Siberian pea shrub again. Szechuan pepper bush. We can grow that here, so we can grow our own Szechuan peppercorns. I've got some going. Lilac has edible flowers. Most people don't know that. And then, so all of your common fruit trees in dwarf form, like apples, pears, plums, peaches, dwarf mulberry, Chicago hardy fig, or there's other figs that you can grow here if you take them in, but Chicago hardy fig and brown turkey fig, you can leave them in the ground and they will survive over the winter. But if you don't do anything to them at all, they'll fully die back to the ground, and then they have to start again from scratch every year. If you do a little bit of, protecting them over the winter, then they'll have a much better jump start the next year.
And will they produce fruit?
If you don't give them that little protection thing, the fruit might not ripen in time.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's probably, or if you plant it in a microclimate. If you plant it in a sunny, warm microclimate, you probably don't have to do much to it, and you'll get fruit.
I love vegetables.
Things in the fall. So just a couple more sections. I can sense that people are getting. What time is it anyways? Am I going over the clock?
Yeah.
It's 8? Oh. Oh crap. All right. Native edible trees, pawpaws, persimmons. So I recommend any of these trees. Most of these trees are very low maintenance. If you've tried growing apples, pears, peach, plums, cherries, you'll know that they're not necessarily low maintenance. They're very prone to pests and diseases. So if you want a low maintenance edible landscape tree, look at pawpaw. Also, pawpaw is deer resistant. American persimmon. When we have the gypsy moth going crazy, they don't touch the American persimmon, which is cool. Maples, people don't think about maples as an edible tree, but of course you can tap any maple. You've tapped Norways, right? Norways?
Yes.
You get Norways growing all around. Tap them for syrup. Hickories, walnuts, red mulberry, American chestnut. If you can get your hands on some, choice American chestnuts from American Chestnut Foundation, or try to find a Dunstan chestnut, which is blight resistant and almost an American chestnut. Sassafras, honey locust, American plum. The birch is yellow and black birch.
What's the use for sassafras?
So sassafras, the leaves are edible. It's one of the only trees that you can just eat the leaves from, like a goat. You can just be a total goat. I do it all the time. That and American linden, also known as basswood, you can just eat those leaves right off the tree. But, of course, sassafras root is root beer, is the root beer root. Also, powdered sassafras leaves is the seasoning called filet, which is an ingredient in gumbo. So if you're ever trying to make like a legit gumbo, you need powdered sassafras leaves, and it's called filet, but that's all it is. Honey locusts, oaks, acorns you can totally eat. You just got to lease the tannins out. So the non-native apple, pear, peach, plum, cherry, Chinese chestnut, Korean pine nut. Looks a lot like a eastern white pine, but it gives you pine nuts. White mulberry, northern pecan, bur oak, Asian persimmon. I've talked to people on Cape. I don't have Asian persimmons growing, but you can grow Asian persimmons here on Cape, which are bigger, like apple-sized persimmons. Fragrant spring tree has edible leaves that taste like arugula. Coosa dogwood, that's a common landscape tree that you can eat those berries. You can eat the inner pulp. Yeah, so. Yep. Oh yeah, yeah, Coosas are everywhere, and you can totally eat them. Heart nut is like another type of walnut kind of hickory. So we've got aquatic plants, sweet flag, water parsnip, American lotus, arrowhead, pickleweed, wild rice, cattail, watercress, water celery, duckweed, and dude. Perennial climbers and vines, grapes, groundnut, passion fruit, hog peanut, beach pea, hardy kiwi. I know there's some people in Falmouth growing hardy kiwi, right? Anyone here? Nice. Hardy kiwi. You can grow kiwis here. They're a little bite-sized, sweeter than your average kiwi. Pop them in your mouth, but non-furry, so you can eat them whole. Hops. I know we got some beer drinkers here. I know that's why you guys are itching. You guys going home to drink some beer and watch the debates. Just keep drinking. Yam vine is a perennial vine. Yam that produces yams on the vine. I have that in our nursery. Earth pea, climbing spinach is a spinach that grows like a vine. Perennial thicket bean is like a lentil type of bean. Perennial. Perennial edible evergreen screen forming tree. This is the last one in this section, and then there's random pictures that I'm not offended if you want to leave. Eastern white pine, eastern red cedar. I say that because that's a juniper berries. Labrador tea is more of a tea plant. There is a native bamboo. So if you want to grow bamboo but don't want to introduce an invasive species, there's this species, Arundinaria gigantea, which is also called canebrake bamboo. So you can use it for stakes and it only doesn't get much taller than that, and so it can be a screen in certain areas if you're looking for that. So in the non-native section, Korean pine nut, bamboos. Oh, so the other thing, you can eat the bamboo shoots. All bamboos, all running bamboos have edible shoots. It's just varying degrees of tastiness. But if you want to grow bamboo, just plant install a rhizome barrier, and you don't have to worry about it invading someone else's lawn. But it is quite a productive plant. Evergreen huckleberry, which is native to the northwest huckleberry. Trifoliate orange is a true citrus that we can grow in the north here. Little golf ball size oranges that taste like orange peel, and that's about it. But if you're looking for orange zest, then you can grow yourself. So just random pictures. There's our home gardens from a few years ago. We grew some food in a canoe for some people. They had this canoe and they were like, yeah, we're getting rid of it. And I was like, let's grow food in there. And they were like, that's a good idea. Some more kind of dry riverbed. So if you have a water issue, kind of you can steer it into a nice, beautiful little, thing. Little dry river, rain garden. We did this little garden at the APCC, and they had all this material on site, so we were able to create this little garden for them. Using row cover gets you a lot more time to grow things like spinach and kale and arugula and all those cold season greens. You'd be surprised at what this little thin layer can do for season extension. We do an edible flower and garnish garden at Waquasit, and the chefs are always out there harvesting. And you can do espaliered trees in small spaces when you train it that way. Someone was asking about bunnies, and either do your raised beds or just do adequate fencing for bunnies. We do some gardens with kids, some school gardens, also the YMCA. So this is the YMCA garden we just did this year, and so here's a case of when it was all mugwort. So we rototilled it, and we had all these YMCA kids and volunteers. We had them comb out the soil and try to remove whatever mugwort roots they could remove. And then we sheet mulched, and we added enough compost above the cardboard that we were able to plant right in annual plants. Lettuces, tomatoes, squashes, everything is doing fine because we put a lot. We did 10 yards of compost and 20 yards of wood chips. Rooftop gardens, we used to do the rooftop garden of Pizza Barbone in Hyannis. And this is a little glimpse of our nursery. We're all about propagating edible plants. And if anyone wants to talk about that, that's all I want to talk about. More on the dry riverbed thing.
Where is your nursery?
We're in West Barnstable. So, but it's just our home. It's just like where we live. So it's not like, we don't have like hours of operation. So it's appointment only. And that's it. That's it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.